Hey there, Zlatko here. Welcome to What is My Brain podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I get the opportunity to chat with fellow founders and business operators about their journey and how they got to where they are now, where they are going, and how they're going to get there. I'm planning on bringing guests and touching on topics such as running multiple businesses, executing ideas, and just spitballing about random topics and current events. It's a casual conversation, and that will hopefully bring value to anyone that decides to listen. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for tuning in.
Awesome. Yuxin, Justin, you guys are both here. Well, Justin just left, but Yuxin, you're here. Thank you, man. Thank you for being on the podcast, man. I really, really appreciate it. As we were just talking with Justin, I feel like you and I have been working together in some capacity, and then we haven't actually connected. And so I'm really, really interested and really impressed by what you guys have done at Replo. So let me know if you want to do a quick intro about, your journey to getting to Replo and what you're working on now and what your role is, and we can kind of jam from there. So I'd love to just give you the floor, my man.
Yeah, cool. And great having thank you for having me on and great being here. And yeah, your podcast is really cool and I'm an honored guest here.
I
A little
appreciate
bit
that, man.
totally. And a little bit about me, kind of two-sentence summary here. I'm one of the co-founders of Replo. Started this company with my one of my best friends for a long time, Noah. We go way back, both went to Berkeley together and studied computer science there. I've known him since freshman year of college. And in short, what Replo is, it's a landing page designer for Shopify. So it allows you to build landing pages really easily. And even without a designer, we have great templates, we have great resources, and we're also trying to build a really cool community around design and brand and CRO around Shopify, and that community has in some ways almost surpassed the product, which is really awesome to see. We're still a small team, and yeah, just trying to do our best in life with everything we're building.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to touch on that. I noticed the Slack community is growing quite rapidly, and I want to kind of go back a little bit and understand where your beginnings were, what made you jump into this. And I don't want to say it's a saturated market, but there's definitely a lot of players in this, building landing pages for Shopify, and there's other companies doing very similar. I'd love to know what's your background. I know you said you studied software engineer, but what's kind of the path to getting to building on Shopify directly rather than elsewhere, and that part of the story.
Yeah, totally. So I guess even to go way further back, like Noah and I were in the same dorm together. We've been friends for a long time. Like I copied his homework, or I guess we're like work group partners or whatever in college, right? So it's I've known the guy for a long time, and even back in college we worked together. We actually digitized Berkeley's course scheduling system while we were still in school, and that was a lot of fun. That helped pay for our tuition. We ended up selling that to the university. So I had a long history of working with him, and
Wow.
we were kind of always friends first, and we were kind of okay, next thing that we do together, we want to do together, right? After college, Noah was the principal engineer at this company called PlanGrid. They got acquired by Autodesk a couple of years back, and I think he was ready to leave because it was a big transition for him from going to such a small engineering team and small company startup environment to a company as big as Autodesk, which had 50 gazillion employees, right?
Yeah.
And then I was at Uber for about 6 years, was a senior engineering manager there, and was managing a couple of engineering teams. And I had always been kind of this I think kind of closet designer in some ways. I was kind of okay, design is really cool. Even though I was kind of in the software engineering space, I think building great products is something that I feel really good about.
Hmm.
I think kind of how this whole thing started was a friend and I used to run a e-commerce drop shipping business on Shopify, and for us design was really important. Even though we were a relatively small player in the space, we were kind of just okay, we wanted everything to look good. We didn't I think Squarespace and these kind of website builders were great if we just needed something really simple, but we were okay, we want it to look a certain way, and how do we get there? And it was kind of
Right.
this combination of being really focused on design, but also kind of being too lazy to kind of code everything from scratch. And we were kind of like, okay, this is kind of an interesting kind of problem, which is that like, if you're, someone's mom like selling necklaces online or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
like, like a simple storefront would do. And there's a lot of like great software out there that helps you do this. But like, if you were like someone who kind of really cared about design and brand and like all of this stuff, it's like you kind of just like had to straight up go out and like hire developers. And we were
Right.
like we actually had this problem at Uber as well. It's like we had, I think, over a $1 billion marketing spend in like 2018, 2019. And like, we wanted all of our content, our global content to be like branded and like have so much like design elements. And like
Mm-hmm.
when people come to Uber, they're like, hey, like this needs to be trustworthy. And there was like never enough engineers to like actually like build out everything like across like, 1,000 different cities, like all the different marketing pages we needed to do, all the different campaigns. Like there was just never enough engineers to like actually do this stuff. And I was like, okay, like I think like there's an interesting opportunity of like, how do we kind of like allow people to create like really amazing content online, like web pages or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and actually have them be like really custom. And maybe that market is not as big as like, everyone building their like next wedding website online. But like for us, that was like a really interesting problem. And I think that naturally kind of extended to like, okay, like we see this problem on Shopify because like we actually had this problem. And like on Shopify, like you have not only like branding is not only important, it's like actually necessary, right? It's like when people
Right.
come on your page, it needs to be trustworthy. It needs to like, and it not only needs to be like, well designed, it also needs to be dynamic. Like there's like custom content on these pages. There's like
Mm-hmm.
discounts. There's like different product information getting pulled from different places. People have like different subscription programs. So it's not like, hey, like we can just have a static page and put some buttons together and it's like good enough. It's like a lot of the companies we work with now, like they really care about this stuff. And
Yeah.
so we saw like a niche there and we were like, hey, like this is an interesting idea. Like, I got Noah on board and he was like, all right, let's do this. So we've been at it for about a year and a half. And then, so far it's been going decently well. So
That's amazing, man. That's amazing. And thanks for sharing that, because I think there's a lot there in terms of especially starting as like drop shipping. I always looked at drop shipping as this, throw up one of these like basic templates, pull in a bunch of products from some vendor, and just go ape shit on like the marketing side, and hopefully people come, hopefully they like the product and all this other stuff. And I always wondered, you know uh, why isn't there somebody literally focusing? I mean, you could build a really great drop shipping website, but what if you just put like a really cool brand face behind it, and
mhm.
spruced it up to the point where people feel, like you said with Uber, like everything needed to be trustworthy and all this? Because 99.9% of the drop shipping websites out there is they're complete garbage, in my
Yeah,
opinion. Like they just look like shit, and I don't ever want to buy anything from there. Even though they're hosted on Shopify, I'm just like,
yeah,
I do not know when I'm getting my package, if I'm getting
mhm,
my pack,
yeah,
all these other things. And so but when you guys were, I guess, running your own website and stuff like
yeah.
that, did you look at some of the other like landing page builders, and did you see a market there that you're like, damn, they're not doing this and these guys are not doing that? Or did you not even tap into those and you just said, we just need to build something cool on this
We kind of
platform?
thought about it. I mean, like I think we also didn't really come from like a like I think if we're gonna do like a hot take on like the drop shipping space, like I think a lot of drop shipping kind of like is like one step removed from like the get rich quick schemes, right? And like
Right.
I think like people don't necessarily put as much thought into like, hey, like in some ways, drop shipping is almost like, hey, I'm testing out the market before like I actually do something a bit more serious, right? And I think we were like, I mean, we were doing fine financially, like we had great jobs. We were kind of just like, hey, let's
Yeah.
do this for fun because like it's an interesting learning experience. And so I think we came from it at like a much more like kind of like product angle, which maybe like a lot of like in some ways that like maybe that's not like that didn't describe like the majority of people in the space. But I think we were kind of like, hey, like we really did care about like brand and design in that regard. I guess like sorry, your question was more around like did we look at the other like
Yeah.
yeah. Um we did. Like, I mean, initially we were actually on Squarespace. So like we were on
Okay.
Squarespace for a while and then we kind of just needed to get something up. And then like there was a lot of kind of like logistics issues with Squarespace. So like we realized it wasn't like the best platform to like run a lot of our e-commerce operations. And then after that, like I think I had been using kind of like Figma for a while, like since probably 2014, 2015, like
Hmm.
just at work. and going like Sketch before that. And like, I think I was just like used to like a certain user experience where I was like, hey, like I can drag this thing here, like, I can align these things like on, mobile, everything's like resizing. And like, I think the e-commerce market was also changing. Like this was like maybe 2019, 2020, which was like, I think for a very long time, Shopify was just like a bunch of like small businesses and they were trying to sell online. And I think like with a little bit probably before the pandemic, but definitely through the pandemic, like there was this emergence of like very large brands on Shopify, right? And like you
Right.
kind of see this now with like Glossier and like Hexclad and like kind of all these businesses, and they're like, and I think most apps on the Shopify App Store are not geared towards that like upper 5% of businesses on Shopify. They're kind of geared towards like, hey, someone, wants to spin up a site really quickly, like potentially for drop shipping. Like, how do I get
Yep.
something up really quickly? And I think most page builders apps in the Shopify space kind of target that market, which is like fine. Like I think it's totally valid market. And we get a lot
Yeah.
of users now where we're like, hey, like, you guys are just starting out, like design maybe isn't your top priority, right? Like, so our software might not be the best use case for you, right? Like I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's like we're about finding people the right tools to use. We're not trying to like show our product. So
Right.
I think we serve a very specific demographic, which is like people who have used these design tools. They really like these design tools, and they're trying to kind of create that user experience within Shopify. So yeah, I don't know if
Yeah.
that makes
No,
sense, right?
that no, no, no. That's perfect because I think that Figma alone has opened up so many different gateways for people to. I mean, I know even like
Mhm.
there's tools that take your Figma file and transform it into complete like Webflow interface, and you can everything becomes very dynamic and all this other stuff. And I feel like you guys have kind of tapped into the Shopify space by using this like almost like web flowy kind of thing where you can customize as
Mhm.
much as you want to, but it's also a lot of drag and drop where anybody can almost do it for themselves.
Yeah, I think like the key here is like the customizability, which we think is really important, which like I mean like we want to
Right.
stick to that, right? Like I think like once you start saying like, hey, here's four boxes and put like four things in this, I think, it does become like in some cases easier to use, but it's not kind of the market that we're kind of going after. I mean, and I think the second part of that is not just the customizability, but the integrations. So like if you use a product like Webflow, like you're kind of just building your own website. Like it's generally kind of like isolated from the rest of the world, where like for e-commerce there's so much like dynamic content getting pulled from like different places, right? So like pricing data, like localization for different countries, like all of these different things, you're like, hey, I want that in my site. Like I want the discount codes to show up, and I want like
Yeah.
all of these interactions to show up. And like that just wasn't solved on Webflow. And like I mean, Webflow is a great user experience, but it's their e-commerce product is still pretty like early stages. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like where we saw the opportunity. We were like, yo, there's like all of these big companies on Shopify. Like this is like, a really good opportunity for us.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. And have you guys have raised funding, right?
Yeah, so we raised a small seed round after YC. We actually have some news coming up about that, which I probably can't talk about,
No, it's okay.
yeah,
It's okay. I
like
just wasn't sure. I was just asking
yeah, so we,
generically.
we did we were in Y Combinator in summer 21, so we did raise a round after that, and yeah, I mean, definitely kind of like in the venture backed game, which has some other implications as well. But um, yeah, it's been going pretty well so far. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And how's it been a transition for you from going, being in the space of like senior manager, engineer manager at Uber to running your own shop now with obviously you have a co-founder and
Mhm.
you guys are growing your team. How's that transition been for you in terms of, kind of oiling up your own machine now to understand how to manage people and, now you guys have a lot of partnerships and a lot of these different components. What's
Mhm.
that transition been like for you and I guess for your co-founder as well to like get adapted to that part of the running the business?
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's in some ways a lot of the same thing, in some ways a lot of the different things, right? So I think like in terms of at the end of the day, like we're still trying to build a great product, and I think like in some ways we're very much biased towards like you know all the implications of kind of like product like growth and kind of like you know and maybe kind of the delusion almost of like, hey, if you build a really great product, like people will come. And like I think like when people use Replo, they like imagine this like really big company, and it's like they're like, oh my god, like I can't believe you guys, like, we just found out about you guys, and it's like we're like 10 people right now, we're less than 10 people right now, right? So it's like this like weird thing where like people expect this really big company, and then like also for a long time, like we were built working on a product, like we didn't have any customers, like we had like a few customers, but it wasn't like this big thing. I mean, even now it's not a big thing, but like relative to where we are now, like a year ago, like we basically barely had any users, and like we were, like I think in some ways a lot of that like go to market motion we had to kind of like learn. It's like Twitter is like a really big channel for us, but like I wouldn't have guessed that ever.
Right.
I'd never used
Right.
Twitter. My Noah uses Twitter a lot. Like he's like, really big into open source and iOS development. And he's like, hey, like, we should get on Twitter and try this out. And I'm like, why the fuck would we use Twitter? It's like we need to like, hire salespeople or something, like it's something else other than Twitter. So there's like certain
Right.
things that we definitely had to learn. But I think a lot of the stuff is still pretty much the same. It's like, at the end of the day, you like hop on a call and like build a connection with someone, right? And like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of like, stakeholder management and like figuring out like how to hire people. Like, I think a lot of these things carry over. Like, I probably did like, 500-600 interviews in the course of like 3 years at Uber, like just like interviewing people every day. Like we were on their like hiring panel and everything. And like, I think that also helps us inform like, okay, like how do we want to build out a team, right? And in some ways it's a little bit freeing because now you're kind of like, hey, like, we raised some venture, like, we have this solid growing business, like let's hire and create the team that we want to work with. Like, and
Hmm.
I think that's like really nice because at like a larger company, a lot of times you're inheriting teams, right? So if, for example, there's a layoff or like the team gets restructured or like we hire more people, it's like, it's kind of like, hey, like, as a middle manager, you're like, hey, here's a team that you get, like, figure out what to do with these people. And 99.99% of the time it's really great. But being able to start from scratch and thinking about like, you know, this isn't my life, but this is a big part of my life. Like, who are the people I want to work with? Like, and like, I'm like so happy with like the team that we've built in terms of like, just like really smart people who, and you just like give them stuff and like they just go out and do it. Like,
That's awesome.
but that's been like, it's kind of like the same kind of like process of like hiring, but it's in some ways it's much more rewarding. Um, yeah, I mean, it's definitely more work, but
Yeah. Absolutely.
you know
So,
how it is.
are you able to, and if you don't want to speak on this completely,
Yeah.
okay, can you share any kind of like numbers of what your growth has been like, what any like revenue numbers or anything like that? If you can't, it's okay. I completely understand. I just want to ask those questions because I think it's
Mhm.
interesting for me to see. As you know, like I built an app on Shopify. We're now slowly starting to push it out.
Mhm.
Um, I think people still underestimate how big of a business you can build on the back of another, platform or a marketplace or a company like a Shopify, or like I built my agency on the back of things like Upwork, for example. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of people underestimate the value of having those channels available to you where you're targeting directly the people who are your customers instead of just being on, quote unquote on Google and
Mhm.
hoping that somebody finds you. So if you can, I would, or if you, whatever you want to share, you can. So
Yeah.
that would be my.
No, totally. I mean, like, I probably can't speak to specific revenue numbers right now, just because like
Okay.
we do have like some press stuff coming out pretty soon. But
Okay.
like I can say that like, I mean, the I think what's really interesting is like I feel like a lot of investors, at least when we were fundraising, were like, "Hey, you guys are fucked because like, this is a really small market. There's like a lot of platform risk and like, like this isn't like a real business. Like you guys are building on the backs of like some other company, right?" And like I think that's really even scary as a founder because you talk to your friends and then you're like, "Hey, like we're doing this thing on Shopify," and they're like, "Wait, why are you doing it for Shopify and not
Right.
like this other thing?" And like even at the beginning of this podcast you were like, hey, like why aren't you guys more focused on the kind of like a broader market? Why are you guys in Shopify? And I think like I think a lot of people kind of don't think about kind of like the process of building like a company and a team. And it's like at this stage, the only advantage you have as a startup is that you're really efficient and you're able to like have a lot
Right.
of focus. Like the thing you lose as a big company is that when you have 1,000 people, you're not like 1,000x more efficient. You're like,
Yeah.
some or like some multiple of 1x to 1,000x, right? Probably closer to the 1x. So um
Right.
I think like that focus has just been like so good for us because like what I can say is like we probably got, I mean, we had 10 paying customers like sometime in the middle of last year. Like, and we were kind of like, hey, like, you know, seems like it's not going super well. Like, we need to continue working on the product. We had like, you know, these 10 design partners that we were working with. And we were kind of just like, yeah, like how do we like grow faster? And what we really underestimated was that like these 10 customers, they were using us for like 10 hours a day. And like as soon as our product got good enough, they were telling all their friends about it, right? And then like basically in the course of like 3 weeks or sorry, like 2 or 3 months, like we got like over 1,000 like people using Replo, and like a
Wow.
thousand merchants and agencies. And it's like like at this point, like people who like sign up, I'm like, I don't even know who you are. Like, and then I'm like, hey, like,
That's
where
the
did you
most
hear
exciting
about
part of it, is when you don't
us?
know the people that are signing up.
Well, it's like I don't know who they are, and like I don't know. Like I try to hop on a call with. I still try to hop on a call with people because I'm like, hey, like I
Yeah.
want to understand like your journey, and like I want to understand you
Right.
as a person. And it's like fun for me. And then I'm like, hey, like where did you hear about us? And they're like, oh, like I heard about you through X. And I'm like, who the fuck is X? Like I don't know that person either. So like that because like we're in such like a relatively small niche. I mean, Shopify is not a small niche, but it
Right.
is a niche nonetheless. Like,
Relatively, it is.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, like that it just like allows you to like concentrate so much like word of mouth and like kind of like almost like virality in some ways in terms of like who's talking about you. Like we have people hopping on calls and then they're like, hey, 3 people this week told me about this. Like I don't even know what you guys do, but like I just wanted to hop on a call. And I'm like,
Wow.
that's really bizarre because A, you should probably know what we do, but like B, like there's 3 people talking about it and we don't know who these 3 people are. And like in some ways that's really cool because we're able to maintain this like really lean team and stay focused without being like, oh my god, we need to hire like 80 salespeople to like sell
Right.
this product, right? um I mean, in some ways it's also a downside because now like like even in our investor updates, I'm like, hey, like this word of mouth thing is really great, but like it's also a lot of trust that people have in our product and our team. And if we don't do a good job or if we're not able to deliver on the promises that we're making, like that also works against us, right? But as a
Yeah.
startup, it's like it's nice to have that niche and focus. So I don't know. I feel like like it's if the question is like, hey, are we going to be like $100 billion on Shopify? It's like probably not. Like I think there's some other products that we're going to need to expand into like longer term, but I think Shopify is an amazing starting off point. I think you can build an extremely solid business like
Yeah.
on top of Shopify. So
Absolutely, man. And thank you for
uh,
sharing that. I really appreciate it. And
uh,
yeah, and what have been what would you say, you said word of mouth obviously has been a great
mhm,
channel for you guys. What are some of these other, and I want to touch on the community aspect of things,
mhm,
because I think there's especially, you also mentioned Twitter and all these
yeah.
components, and I think that's all part of the community factor. But to me, I want to kind of dig into like where those channels that you've seen when you opened it up, whether it was like an agency partnership channel or this or that,
Mhm.
where did you see some of these big growth points where you said, oh shit, we didn't understand that this would be the working channel for us? What was it? Agencies? Was it tech partnerships? Was it, was it Twitter from your co-founder? Was it, other channels? What had kind of the most rapid, and maybe the word I'm looking for probably is like something unexpected growth, I guess would be the best way to ask
Yeah,
that.
I guess like to rephrase your question, it's like at what point did we realize that that was a channel that we should like invest more in, or
Yeah, yeah, or you maybe opened up 2 or 3 channels and
yeah,
you maybe thought that agencies was going to be the best one, and now it's like tech partnerships or something along those lines.
yeah, dude, honestly, like my honest like founder to founder answer is that like I think we're still figuring it out.
Yeah, no, no,
Like,
no, that's a
yeah,
that's a
I
perfect
mean,
answer,
yeah,
and I think that's a perfect answer.
I think in some ways like we try to like put ourselves in like I think we just tried a lot of stuff. Like I think Twitter is probably not an avenue where we expected, like we talked about before. But then like even the Slack community, like it's not like we had some like glorious ambition in the beginning to be like, oh my god, we're gonna like start a massive Slack channel. Like I think like we saw these other Slack channels and we were like, oh, this is like a really good, like in some ways it was almost out of like laziness because we were like, oh, like
Right.
we don't have, like we were doing our own customer support all the way until like last month basically. Like I was we had like 24/7 support, but the 24/7 support was just like me and Noah on Slack answering support messages, right? And like
Right.
that support. So we created that Slack channel because we were like, hey, maybe like, instead of us answering every message, like we can like get people to answer each other's messages, right? Like
Right.
that's
Right. Right. Right.
interesting. And then like, I mean, we were also like I think originally even before that it started off like we had these like 10 design partners we were working with, and a few of them like didn't pay for Slack, so we literally couldn't set up like a Slack Connect thing with their
Right.
Slack because they didn't pay for Slack, and we wanted to like provide better service than like just you know through email. So we were like, hey, like we love you guys, like we want to support you, like here's a Slack channel. And like we created that Slack channel initially as like a, how do we talk to our like few design partners, like how do we make sure that people are getting their support questions answered. And it was like 20 people in that Slack, right? And then
Yeah.
over time we were like, hey, like we started working with this partner, we started working with this freelancer, and we just like invite them to the Slack channel. And it pretty much grew organically. Like like now people are inviting like people on their team, and then like at this point like it's growing much faster than we can directly invite people. But I think it kind of started off like, hey, let's like put ourselves in our customers' shoes or our partners' shoes, like what would they expect. And then it kind of just went from there. I mean, even with the agency stuff, it was like, I mean, we were kind of like, hey, like this, we didn't have like a sales team. We didn't have, like to this day, we don't have a sales team. We don't have any marketing spend. We're just like, how do we grow this organically? And we're like, okay, well, if we sell this to an agency, like that's kind of like selling to like end merchants, right? Versus like if we directly sell to a merchant, we'd have to talk to every single merchant. So
Right.
um, I think it was kind of just like, okay, like if we're an agency, like this would save us time, this would save us money. This would like leverage our team, and then trying to kind of just think about like, how do we get like win-wins there? And
Mm-hmm.
then using that as kind of like a logical basis to be like, okay, here's the channels we should try. Like even with the podcast we launched, Justin was like, hey, like I'm already doing these case studies on the phone. Like every week. Like, why don't we just
Right.
turn this into a podcast and like actually make this available as like another medium for like,
Right.
people to find out about us and also to like learn something new about e-commerce. Um, so yeah, there was never like a master plan where we were like,
Yeah.
like we're
But those are the best plans though, that when you don't have any, when you just go with what's basically calling, like the community side of things,
Mhm.
it just spread like wildfire because somebody invited somebody else and you guys
Yeah.
needed to do these things. Podcast, same thing. It's like, hey, I'm already doing this. Like, let's formalize it a little bit. We don't need to
Mhm.
do anything crazy. We don't need a production. Let's just get on the phone, talk to people, record it, throw it out there. And maybe the one sentence you say in that podcast helps another person come on board and realize, oh, they solved my problem of building out a Shopify store without having to hire a $20,000-$30,000 agency or whatever that might be.
Yeah.
I
And like
think
a lot of,
that's really effective.
yeah, and a lot of people who come on, like I don't even expect them to like use Replo per se. It's like a lot of times it's like maybe not the right product for them, or they're too early, or
Right.
they're too large. And it's like, I think it's also nice because I think they also have a lot of value that they can provide like to the rest of the community. And it's like I mean, maybe when we're like really large, we're gonna track this. Like right now, we don't track like, if you join a community, like are we trying to like sell you on this? Like I don't really care, right? Because if it's the right product for you, I think like over time you will like use it. And if it's not, like we also want to be honest with ourselves, right? If people are like, hey, this like product isn't useful for me, like we want to know why, right? And like it could be like, there's something to improve, it could be something else. Like I think we need to be honest with ourselves, which is why like we don't, pay for marketing. We don't like pay, like we don't have salespeople. Like we're kind of just
Right.
like, hey, if this product is useful for you, like you should use it. If not, like that's totally fine. Like I'm not going to be offended about it. And I think the other thing also is that like I don't know. Like, I think like I'm also just trying to be honest with ourselves about like, what are the channels that work and what are the channels that don't. I think like when companies get larger, there's like this revisionist history where they're like, oh, like these founders had like this fucking golden vision on like on a mountain. And then like they came down and they were like, all right, here's like all the channels that would work. And we knew this would work. And, we hired all these salespeople and it magically worked. And it's never like that. So,
Right.
um, I think a lot of people like when they read on like TechCrunch or like, AngelList or something, and like this company raised a massive amount of money, and then they're like, oh my God, like these people like had the right idea from the start, and like, they like knew exactly what to do. It's like, dude, those people were like grinding in a cave for like 6 years.
Yeah. Those are literally cavemen building a company right
Yeah, yeah.
there.
And it's like there's like this like thing within YC even that was like, you honestly should just like ignore all your competitors and just keep going, because a lot of times like people would just give up, or like, like it's like if you just like keep doing it and you just have like tenacity, it's like 90% of the time something will work out, even if it's not the thing that you
Yeah.
expected from the beginning. So um,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. What did you when you guys initially launched? Did you guys? I mean, I guess can you
Mhm.
share any of like the bigger merchants or companies that you guys have on board? I know you have some on your
Mhm.
website, like partners and merchants that are using
Yeah.
you. Who came on board that surprised you in terms of? Because here's why I'm asking this
Mhm.
question, and I've seen this happen with our
Yeah.
agency, for example, is you sometimes think, oh, these big companies, they have all their shit figured out. They have all these designers on hand. They can make everything look beautiful. A lot of the times, that's not the case. A lot of the
Mhm.
times, they just want exactly what the same small merchant wants. They want to be able to quickly build a marketing page, landing page, put it together. They don't want to depend on the developer. They don't want to depend on a designer. They
Mhm.
already have the brand assets. The marketing person just wants to go in there and just click, 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 get it
Mhm.
done and launch it and run a campaign, see if it works and come back with some results.
Mhm.
Is there anything like that that you've seen that kind of maybe even surprised you and said, "Oh, wow, these big companies came to, our product to build something like this," where you would imagine that they would just be able to build something like that in-house and use it natively on Shopify?
Um, to be honest, I didn't have that like surprise moment, and I think it's because, well, okay, I think I was surprised and not surprised. So I think like in the not surprised camp, like because like I had spent so much time at Uber, like people think it's just like monstrous big company that's like a public company, and then you go in and you're like, wait, like they don't have their shit figured out, right? It's
Yeah.
like basically Uber is run like 1,000 different startups where people are literally like working out of hotel rooms in like different cities, and they're just trying to like launch like ride sharing, right? At least like a few years back. Like I'm sure they're
Yeah.
more established now, but like you go into like any of these big companies and you're like, wait, like it's just a random amalgamation of people that are like trying to figure their shit out. So
Right.
I think like like I think there's like this famous quote, I don't know from who, but it's kind of like, oh, like if at the end of the day you kind of just realize that like everyone's still trying to figure their stuff out, right? Like parents,
Yep.
like teachers,
Always.
like everything. So I think I always kind of like carry that mentality, but I think like one thing that did surprise me was like I think there was a lot of like there's a lot of like social proof in e-commerce where it's like the decisions you make on which agency you work with, which partner you work with, which
Hmm.
software you buy, a lot of times is influenced by like if your friend is like vouching for it, right? If a competitor in a space, like a friend or in the space, like is using that software, and you're like, oh wow, like that's a really great piece of software because X is using it. And like I think there's definitely some of that, but there was a lot of like, I don't know, like we would send like cold emails to like these really large companies. Like we work with like Caraway right now. We work with like Hexclad. We work with like Jambies, and like I have like some of their products in my kitchen and stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like a lot of times it's like we literally just like cold emailed them. And
Wow.
like the timing just worked out. Like, or it was like like I felt like that sales process would have taken longer where we were like, oh my God, like because when we were starting out, like we didn't have anything. So it was like we really needed to like convince people that like, like, hey, like this is a problem. Like we're not gonna like pivot, in 2 months and leave you with nothing. Like, but more recently it's kind of just been like, hey, like this is my problem, like can we solve it together, and we're still small enough where we're super responsive, like we have 24/7 support, and like and like we try to onboard people like really well, and um but it was kind of just like it kind of got to a point where we're just like, hey, like can we sit down, have a human conversation about like how we can solve your problem, and like if our solution works for you guys, great. If not, like that's totally fine. Like I don't even take it personally. I'm like, okay, that's great feedback, like that's fine. But I think that process of like, I guess like closing customers was like a lot easier than I thought, and it's worked out well so far. So I think that was a little bit surprising that like we got some of like very big logos just through like random
Right.
conversations, or like even cold emails, like so I don't know.
No, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I mean, those are the stories that make it all worth it when you start getting into whether you're raising funding or you're bringing on new client. Like when people
Mhm.
see that stuff, it's like, oh, they're trusted by so and so. Like my small business doesn't need crazy amounts of customizations or whatever that might be. That's really
Yeah.
really cool. Um, what else are you guys, anything else that you guys are working on at the moment for the product that you feel like is been like a requested feature, or something that you maybe didn't foresee in the beginning that you guys are now really like tapping into?
Um, well, I think like the main thing is that we need to like hire a bigger team. I think like one
Yeah.
nice thing about having like, like all these customers is like a lot of times they'll request features, right? And they'll like come and ask you about like, hey, like, can you guys do this? Can you guys do that? And I'm sure for an agency that's true as well, right? It's like
Yes.
service offerings you guys have. And I think like I think that's a totally different problem than like, a few months back when we were like, hey, like if we were, running a, 8-figure, 9-figure e-commerce company, like we would want this. Like having customers tell you that, I think like, and if you have the right mechanism for prioritizing, like, how you spend your time internally, like I think that's just a lot easier. Um, but right now I think like we need to grow the team. Like we have like so many cool features we want to launch, and we're just like, oh my god, like we're so like, underwater with like all of these customers, and like, you know the overwhelming majority of them are super happy, but like there's also like, they're also expecting new features to be built. So I think the main things are like, I don't know. I think a lot of there's obviously like features we want to add. So for example, like, even something like, hey, like being able to like schedule like a page to be published, or like building different parts of your store, or like,
Hmm.
um, better integrations with like different apps. So for like example, like subscriptions, like we want to make these integrations really easy to do. But I think there's a larger product that we're almost building, which is like outside of the software, which is like almost a services aspect, right? It's like people aren't coming to use your software because they're like, oh my god, I have to like pay for the software. They're kind of like, hey, I have this problem for my job, like I want to save time, I want to save money, I want to be more efficient. And people are starting from that, right? So if you're not like speaking to that as like a company, it's like, even if it's not part of the core services we provide, like we want to make it easy for people to like design really nice pages. So like, is there
Yep.
something, we can do with in Figma, or like in these design tools? It's like, how do we make it really easy for people to like find great agencies and great partners and great freelancers? Because like, when was the last time like we went on Upwork and like try to find someone to like do something and they like did a terrible job at it, right? And then like
Right.
that happens like 90% of the time, right? So like so it's like, how do we find, and like vet our experts? Like we interview, like I literally personally interview like all of our experts. Like I have them go through and build something in Replo. Like I QA it. I like, and then before we even like let them work with anyone, like we do all of these things. And then now it's like the quality of your offerings is not just the software. Like the software is kind of an enabler, but there's, great partners, great design freelancers, great like content that people can do. And like all of that in aggregate, people are like, oh, okay, I buy into this community, even if I like am not ready to use the software, I don't have the budget for the software or whatever. Like that's
Hmm.
totally fine. Like I don't really care if they use the software or not. I mean, I do care at the end of the day, but like, as a community building aspect, I really don't. I think we're just trying to provide value to people. So I think that's like, I don't know. I feel like that's like the bigger product that we're working on. And
Yeah.
maybe it's like some like weird karma thing, but I'm kind of like, okay, if we like actually add value to people and we build this community, like the revenue will come at the end of the day. It might be like,
Right.
2 or 3 or 6 months away. Like I've been talking to some merchants that started talking to like 6 months ago. And then
Yeah.
they're like, oh yeah, like we're ready to like sign up, like, to pay for this. And I'm like, great. Like, like, and we'll continue supporting you. So, I don't know. I think that's kind of how I think about the product, I guess, for
Yeah, no,
yeah.
that's really cool. That's really cool. I do have to say I really enjoy the fact that you came from, what everyone would envision like an Uber where everything
Mhm.
seems, and I had a friend work at Apple and he
Yeah.
went into the finance department. He goes, "You do not understand how much of a shit show this place is. Like as
Yeah. My
clean
my
and nice
girlfriend
the
worked in finance at Apple, so I
Yeah, and she and my friend, he was just like, "You see how all their products are nice and beautiful?
Mhm.
That's where the effort is put into. The back office is a complete fucking mess. They
Yeah.
just make so much money. It's uncontrollable how much. Like, there's all these things that he told me, and I was like, dude, nobody would even believe that story. He goes, dude, he's like, I'm working on things from like 4 years ago. like right now. I'm working
Yeah.
from financing like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And I'm like, so what you said about Uber and how you feel like it's just a lot of mini startups in one big company have one mission of just like ride sharing. Like let's make it
Mhm.
the best experience that we can. And so I like that you took that mentality and now you're just like, I really don't fucking know what my best channels are. I don't know what everyone wants, but
Yeah.
as people tell me, I take that in, I think about it, I talk to my team, and then we
Mhm.
go in and prioritize what we need to build or what we don't need to build at this point or whatever that might be. So I really respect that because I don't think anyone has anything figured out, and I'm a big proponent of that because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if anybody had it figured out, then they still don't have it figured out, in my opinion.
Well, I think like you run an agency and you there's like so many things that you're running, right? So it's like I think
Yeah,
you also get that, which is like, I think like as a leader and as someone like I think there's like a lot of posturing in leadership where you're like, oh my God, like I'm like this like godlike figure that has everything figured out. And it's like you don't actually want that. Like A, it's like not a fun team culture to have. B, it's like it's just really
yeah,
stressful because in your mind internally, you're like, I don't have any of this shit figured out. And like
yeah,
I think the
yeah,
only thing you can do is like listen to, everyone's opinions and like make a collective decision about it, right? And I think like, there is an aspect of like, being the final decision maker if there is like, some sort of tie or some sort of conflict. But generally speaking, like a lot of these decisions, just like the amalgamation of just like random people putting in ideas. Um,
exactly.
and yeah, I don't know. I think that's what makes it fun, I guess, is like kind of trying to figure out that problem and that puzzle.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely. No, I think I think that's exactly what it is. And honestly, man, after a few years, in the beginning, I was wearing so
mhm,
many hats, and I said like, oh, I could figure all this out and all these other things. And every time something new comes up, I'm like, I don't know that. I don't know that. I tell my team, I'm like, hey guys, I have no idea what the fuck this is, but
yeah.
do you guys have any idea? Like, I'm asking them, and I always believe in that part about like surround yourself with people that are just smarter and brighter than you
Mhm.
think, and everything will be fine. Like you go to them for advice and they come to you and you sort of bounce these ideas back and forth, and then you just figure it out from there, and you make like you said, you make the best decision and you just go roll with it. And when you fuck up, great, you own it. And when you win,
Yeah.
same token, you just own it and you take accountability and say, yep, made that decision and worked out really well, or I made that decision and it really screwed everything over, and I'll figure out how to fix it.
Yeah, it's a fun adventure. I mean, like I think even internally, like we have all of our like customers like, open to our team. Like we have our revenue, like, how much cash in our bank account, like all of that's open. And I'm like, okay, like guys, like at the end of the day, like the only constraint here is like it's like, yes, we hire people to like do certain things. Like we hire Justin to like, run growth, and we hire engineers and like, like all of that stuff. But I'm like, at the end of the day, it's like it's a, linear constraint problem. It's like here's the
Yeah,
number in our bank account, right? Like here's
yeah,
the current product so far. Like anything goes, right? So it's like if we want to hire more people, if we need to like, run some ads, if we need to like do anything, it's like the world is your oyster. Just like let me know like what we need to do to grow.
right.
Um and I think it's just like a lot more fun because it's like a lot more collaborative. Like you're learning something, you feel like you're not like, puppeting the entire team or something, right? Like it's just like
Exactly,
people like you want to
exactly.
hire people who are better than you at this. Um,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now, I wanted to ask you really quickly because I don't get to
Mhm.
talk to a lot of people who've gone through like YC.
Yeah.
What was your experience like, and anything that stood out? And I guess when you guys applied,
Mhm.
did you think that you had a good chance of getting accepted into their batch that year? Like, tell me a little bit more about that because I know it's not the easiest place to get into, I guess.
Yeah, I think they have like a ridiculously low acceptance rate. I think maybe it was a little bit different for us because like we went to Berkeley and like we had a lot of friends who did YC. So like we were very familiar with like kind of, like the experiences of our friends, like good and bad, right? Like,
Yeah,
and I think like in some ways, I think a lot of people a lot of people hear YC and they're like, oh my God, this is this amazing thing. And it's like not actually like, necessarily the right fit for a lot of companies. And I wouldn't even say it was a perfect fit for us. And the reason I say that is because like we did YC summer of 21. Noah basically quit his job like the Friday before. And we had like nothing going into YC. So, and I think like a lot of YC is kind of like putting you this in this like artificial pressure cooker where they're like, okay, guys, like go by the end of YCs to have like X in revenue and like, Y in customers. and we just like weren't really ready for that. Like there was like a lot of product building we needed to do. We needed to talk to more customers, and I think like it definitely pushed us. It drove us to be like, oh my god, like we need these like contracts signed, even if we didn't have a fully working product and all of that stuff. And I think it definitely accelerated us. But I think like I don't know. I think in some ways it's like it created a lot of pressure, and in some ways it's good, and in some ways it's bad. It's like maybe we should have done it like 6 months later. I feel like we maybe would have gotten more value out of it. Like I mean, we applied basically like not thinking we were gonna get it. And we were like, hey, let's like do it as a trial run, right? And like, I mean, I think the network from like, I think the main thing with a lot of these incubators is like, effectively speaking, the success rate of every other incubator except YC is zero.
Yeah.
Because if I ask most people, like, hey, like name a successful company from incubator X, like any incubator besides YC, like 99.999% of people won't be able to name a company
Right.
that's had a successful exit, which is weird because like there's so many incubators and they all pitch themselves as like this like freaking amazing thing that you have to join. So I mean, like for us, it was like, okay, like if we were going to do an incubator, we should do YC. It helped us with like, it helped us infinitely with like investors. Like we hadn't raised money before at a C stage company, so that was helpful for us. The introductions were really helpful. The network was really helpful. Like I've met a lot of really close friends through YC. So, and just like surrounding yourself in like a very like kind of like intellectual environment where people have the same goals as you, it's like not something that's really easy to come by as an adult, right? It's like a lot of people are like working almost in silos at like big companies, and a lot of people are just like working, as a job. It's like it's not really something they're passionate about. And like in YC you just meet like so many fucking smart people, and they're
Yeah.
like, yo, like I've been doing like freaking like X for like 20 years, and like now I'm like starting a company in X. I'm like super knowledgeable, and I'm like, Jesus,
It's imposter syndrome really
yeah,
kicks
it's
in
like
at that
real
point.
imposter syndrome. And like a lot of companies that even do YC these days, like they're relatively established. Like I almost feel like YC has moved a little bit beyond like the like, hey, you have an idea, like go experiment with it. I think they're becoming a little bit like less risk tolerant compared to where they were maybe 15 years ago. And I think that's probably for the better. But if there's like, that's a whole separate other conversation. But like there's a lot of like, I think being in that environment, especially like, I think now YC is back in person. It's like so good because it pushes you to like do more. And like having that support network where you're like, hey, like, I have like X money in the bank account, like I'm doing Y revenue, like, am I fucked? Or like, is there
Yeah,
like
yeah,
light
yeah,
in
yeah.
the tunnel? And then I feel like people in YC are just like so intellectually honest, right? Because everyone's there to like succeed, and everyone's there to like help you. And like, people are very open. Like they're like, okay, like this is where we were at, like, a year into our startup, like we were completely fucked. So like, and now we're
Right,
like, freaking DoorDash or something, right? It's like,
right,
like it's,
right.
and hearing that is like so much, like, so, I guess comforting in some ways, but it's a good support network. So I, I don't
It's
regret.
always easier. It's always easier to handle your problems when you hear other people having
Yeah, it's like
similar or
asking for
different
dating
problems.
advice, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like suddenly everyone's like an armchair like counselor, like when you're talking about
Right,
your friend's dating life, and then you're like,
right.
wait, like I like, had the same problems and I wasn't able to overcome them. So I think
Yeah,
that support network is amazing. I mean, like I think for anyone doing anything like venture backed, like I think YC is a great option. I think there's a lot of businesses that shouldn't be venture backed, but people think that it has to be venture backed. And I'm like,
right,
dude, like having like Silicon Valley VCs like invest in your company is not necessarily a good thing. Um,
right.
so I think that's something that I think a lot of people have to think through before like they're just like, hey, like I want to do YC or whatever. So um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And how far along were you guys within your product, or how much of it was built out when you guys joined YC?
Oh, we had like nothing. Like we had like that was kind of like one of the crazy parts is that we were probably I, I think YC is like kind of this interesting thing because like a few companies join and they're like relatively established, and they're kind of like using YC as kind of like, hey, like, we're gonna help use the YC brand to like help us hire, to help us raise money. Like a lot of companies are like very bootstrapped. They've been bootstrapped for a few years, and they're like, hey, we're gonna use YC to kind of accelerate, our growth trajectory here. We were basically like, hey, we just left our full-time job to explore this idea.
That's amazing.
Like,
That's amazing.
and we're like, we're not quite sure why we got in. Like, and kind of YC does this thing too. I mean, like, just to not even like bias her and not to kid ourselves. Like, we probably got in because we had been friends for so long and we had worked together before, and like, like, I always treat Noah as like a friend first and co-founder second, and like, I'm kind of just like, hey, like, they were probably like, yo, these people probably aren't gonna like get divorced like immediately as soon as YC starts, right? Like,
Right,
or, like,
right, right, right,
two
right.
generally, Noah's a lot smarter than me, but like two generally competent people in a room together, like they can probably figure something out. So I think that was kind of like their mentality. But I mean, a lot of YC was just spent like even building a prototype, like trying to figure out like, who we talk to at these companies. Like, we didn't have any. Like, I think now it's weird because like we talk to people and they're like, oh my god, like I've heard about you through X, or like, people randomly text me. They're like, oh, someone asked me to text you. And like, that wasn't the case before. Like, all we had done is just like a random drop shipping business. So like, no one knew who we were. And even at like our first customer, they were like, yo, you're in YC. Like, we worked with the YC company before. Like, they completely imploded and like all of their employees got fired. Like, how are we so sure that the same thing won't happen to you? And I don't know, that's kind of like scary, but we really didn't have much. It was, yeah, it's been an
Yeah.
interesting thing.
Interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting. I love that journey, man. I love how much you're figuring out along the way. And honestly, it makes me believe in the product that much more, because I feel like at any point, if
Mhm.
something was to have like a as something was to have like a small shift,
Yeah.
you're going to be ready for that shift, because you're like, oh, we've done this like three other times or whatever that might be. And I think that's awesome. I think it's undervalued, and I think some people be like, oh, you're fucking crazy, and I'm like, no, that's fucking cool crazy to me.
Well, I think there's like a disconnect between like what you read on Twitter and LinkedIn and like kind of like all of these like thought leaders that are like, oh my God, this is like the way to run a company. And then you
Right,
like look at their background and you're like, wait, you've never run a fucking company before.
right,
Like,
right,
that's true for like
exactly.
most investors as well. Like, most investors haven't been founders, right? So it's
Right.
like when our like I mean, our investors are great, but like, I mean, I remember when we were fundraising, it was like all these investors would like be like, guys, you're doing it all wrong, you should do X. And I'm like, how the fuck do you know that? Like, you've been like, your first job out of college was an investor, and now you're still
Right.
an investor. It's like, oh, you're just like in the peanut gallery. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think like,
It's like people trying to tell you what to do when they
yeah.
have never done the thing.
Yeah, and I think like in general, like I think founders should have a bit more confidence, right? Like, whether
Yeah.
regardless of whether it's like, venture backed or not, it's like the best person to know who your business is, like, honestly, yourself.
Yeah,
Um
absolutely.
so yeah.
No, that's awesome. Now, I know we're already going almost for an hour. I wanted
Yeah.
to quickly ask you, where do you have any kind of foresight into where you see sort of the Shopify like e-commerce space like going into? Are you seeing any sort of trends where you're just like, ooh, that's interesting? I understand,
Mhm.
there's the whole AI thing and a lot
Yeah.
of these concepts happening, but have you noticed anything that you're like, oh, this is an interesting take on e-commerce, or like a new trend that you're seeing or anything like that?
Um hmm. I don't know. I feel like I don't have a specific answer to that. I don't know, like, what are you thinking about? Like, was there anything you feel like?
I feel like 2 years ago I would have said now would be the time for a lot more like virtual reality stuff to be imploding into the e-commerce
Mhm.
space and like really taking over, and a lot of these virtual rooms and all these other things that could be happening. I
Mhm.
mean, even now, like, you go on, the Apple website, for example, and like only like one of their components is like, see how this thing
Mhm.
looks in your room or whatever that might be. And I just don't feel like that technology has made it as far as I would have thought, like
Mhm.
even thinking about it like 2 years ago. So to me, that's been a little bit of a surprise, because I was like, oh
Mhm.
shit, when I was building my agency, we're
Yeah.
like 2 years in at that point. I was
Yeah.
like, oh shit, we're gonna have to hire like VR people for an agency, what the fuck is going on, type of thing. But it,
That's
it
very
really
interesting.
hasn't been the case. Like, there's only a few brands that probably require that, and most of the time they'll just hire somebody internally to kind of take care of that, because you don't need a entire team to take care of that.
Yeah, I think one thing I've been kind of thinking a lot about is like, mm, I don't know if this is like a trend per se, but like I think there's there's kind of these like waves of kind of like interest in different things in e-commerce. So like I think I, I think one thing that we kind of joke about internally is that like there's kind of all these, because I do some angel investing on the side as well, and like there's kind of this like common trope within, I mean, not just e-commerce but generally within SaaS, where it's like, hey, like Amazon is doing X, right? And like therefore, like your, $2 million a year like e-commerce company should also be doing X, or like some version of
Right.
X. And I saw that a lot with like, product recommendations, and like, you know, some like machine learning applications as well. Like, and then like there was like the whole thing with like headless, and like kind of like
Right.
bringing in a whole dev team to like manage your store. And like it, I think it's like kind of like a spectrum, right? It's like, okay, yes, at certain stages it's like, if you're reducing your payment processing fees, or if you're like cutting down on coupons, or like some variation of this where you're bumping your revenue like 1 or 2%, like at a certain size that does become significant. Like, at
Right.
Amazon scale, it's like probably billions of dollars a year. But like
Right.
I think a lot of people are kind of trying to like apply that for a while, especially like I think during the pandemic, when like there was a lot of venture capital within the e-commerce space. I think people were like, "Oh my god, you have to get on like doing machine learning on your like product recommendations and your sales data." And I'm like, dude, you guys get like 10 sales a day. Like
Right.
your problem isn't like you don't have machine learning. Your problem is that like your product sucks, or
Right.
like um,
Like focus on the thing that's like there already, not what you think is going to be there.
yeah. And I think people, I mean, I think generally speaking, people have this like magic bullet concept where they like read something and they're like, oh my God, this person knows. Like usually it starts with an investor or like some dude on LinkedIn or
Yeah.
Twitter or something. And they're like, this will be like the golden bullet. And that happens with like Replo now quite a bit, where people are like, hey, like, I want to get into landing pages. I'm like, okay, let's back up. Like, what is your strategy here? And like, like we want to help in any ways we can. That might end up in you buying our product, but it could also end up with something else. Like you could, we could refer you to an agency, and they'd be a great solution for you. So I think like, thinking tactically about like, is this the right solution for me? And but I think like generally within e-commerce, there's like a lot of like bandwagoning and stuff. And I'm like, okay, like, sometimes it works out, and sometimes like in 6 months, like everyone forgets about it. So
Exactly. Exactly. Like the whole hype about Chat GPT right now is like so
mhm,
big and everyone's using it and all these other things. And not that I think AI is going away. I think it's just going to keep getting smarter. But I think it's like the same thing that happened with NFTs, right?
mhm,
NFTs got so big. Everyone thought that e-commerce was going to change overnight and
yeah.
everyone's going to do NFT memberships and all these other things. Few
Well, there was so
brands
much
ended
hype
up
because
jumping
like
on that.
Shopify did something with NFTs too, right? And then for them, it was probably like two random like I don't know anything about their product,
Right.
but I'm assuming it was
Right.
like two random engineers on like a weekend, and they were like, "Hey, we're gonna do this NFT thing," and then like Shopify was like hopping on a bandwagon because they just have a big budget, and they're like, "Hey, like
Exactly.
let's advertise this," and then every small company was like, "Hey, we need to do NFTs for like e-commerce,"
Exactly.
and I'm like, "No, you don't. Like
No, you don't, dude.
yeah." So I don't know. I think like a lot of these things are just like way louder than it. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
mass majority of people like do not care. Um,
Exactly. I think social media amplifies everything a little bit too much, but at
mhm.
the same time, it's like you have to make the end decision of whether that's something like let things marinate for a little bit before you start like, cooking them right away type of thing. Like sometimes it's good to like soften it up, be like, okay, what are the loopholes here? What do I, and from that perspective, yeah, NFTs was supposed to be this like big old thing. And I'm like,
Yeah.
not
Well, now
gonna,
like
not
interest rates
gonna
are up and no one has any money, so they're like, all right, I
Exactly.
don't care about NFTs anymore.
And Ethereum is completely down and all this other shit.
I mean, I think
Exactly.
yeah, I think ChatGPT is interesting because I think it's kind of like it does enable us to do like it to like test more things and all that stuff. But I mean,
Right.
I don't know.
There's a lot of work to do there.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely saved time. I mean, like in like writing emails and everything.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, it's like, how does it help you, right? And I think you have to think very clearly about that, because I think like a lot of people just follow like whatever the latest hype is on Twitter or whatever. And
Hmm.
like in the case of ChatGPT, like it does save us time. It's not like like a golden, like a silver bullet, but
Right.
um, yeah, NFT stuff, I just have no idea. Like the whole Web3 thing is very bizarre to me, but I think you kind of either fall in that camp or you don't, and
Exactly.
it's
Exactly.
yeah, like I can't empathize with the people who like are on the Web3 game, but
Yeah.
like how does this help my immigrant parents? Like Out of the
That's
same word.
exactly what it is.
Yeah,
That's exactly the same thing with me. It's like my parents are not going to be using this, so for that, that's like 50% of the market's already gone.
pretty much. It's like,
Yeah, dude, it's crazy. It's
yeah.
crazy. Anything else you want to riff on, Yushin? I'm
Uh,
happy to talk. I know we've been already going for an
yeah.
hour. Anything else you want
Well,
to
I'm
chat
curious,
about?
like where you guys are going, like in the next year. Like, I guess, like what goals you have for, um, like on your team and
Yeah,
yeah,
so one of my focuses right now. So I'm doing a few different things, right?
yeah,
So I have my service agency, which obviously we're working with you guys a little bit to get
hmm
some of these like components up there at the marketplace that you guys
hmm
are planning on launching and all this.
hmm
That's one component of it. The other part of it is my product agency, where we're focused on building things across Shopify,
hmm
Chrome extensions, and different things. My main focus right now is actually drop voice, which is attaching voice notes to products.
hmm
So I think there's a human level of experience there that I think brands can double down on, and I
hmm
think that on the underlying foundation there is, I think, retention and higher LTV for a lot of these brands, because um, the way I thought about the product and where the idea came from was, I've been in the Shopify space for a long time,
yeah,
and when I looked at everything is like pop-ups and give me your email, give me your like give
mhm,
me all these things, like give
yeah.
me.
It's like
And
one
I'm
of
like,
these things
okay,
that's
you
like
can,
super annoying, but like it like technically works. It's like the freaking like the spinner thing. You're like
yeah,
this.
yeah.
There's like you're like this. There's no way this works. But then like I guess it does work because for like I don't know. It's
Yeah, like 7 out of the 10 brands use it. So
yeah.
you're like, dude, But so for me, the voice thing came from a perspective of, our attention span, everything is shrinking,
hmm
and I wanted this. The way we started out is I wanted this to be a sort of a component. So if I buy, let's say, for example, this water bottle, right, and this water bottle is made out of material that is unbreakable and it doesn't, whatever else it is, and maybe you do or you don't know that, but my goal was through the customer journey. I wanted the when the customer buys the product, I wanted them to have that additional layer of that experience to hear from either a merchant or maybe a familiar voice. Like
hmm
maybe it's an influencer, maybe it's somebody that's sponsoring the product, maybe whatever that might be. To hear from and be like, hey, thanks for purchasing the product. Just wanted to let you know, for example, this is made out of material that you can drop out of an airplane. It's not
hmm
going to break, and we donate 10% of the proceeds to this cause because
hmm
we support it, and as a brand we stand by that, and hopefully you enjoyed just giving that little extra tidbit about the product. It could be literally anything,
hmm
and almost having that personal experience after you've already committed to the like,
yeah.
you're not trying to sell somebody on it, you're not trying to do any of that. And so that's a big piece to me as a on both sides, as a merchant and as a customer.
hmm
And so recently we updated the app and added some additional features where we're allowing people to embed voice notes into actual product pages and anywhere across Shopify.
hmm
So that's, I think, another piece of it where now we can have run testimonials through there or whatever that might be, where it's more voice originated rather than just like reading a bunch of text. I
hmm
think that's another component of it. So I think I know that it gives a lot of value to the brand from
yeah.
that perspective, but I also think that there's a lot of work to to convince people that this is something that will push the envelope forward for them with the customer. Build that. I think back to my point about like people asking for emails and all these other
Mhm.
things. I'm more focused about, and you mentioned this in the beginning with like brand, right? Like the way things look, the way things feel. I think this is part of that feeling that you get when you go shop on, let's say, Caraway, for
Mhm.
example, and you hear from one of their marketing people or whatever else it is, or somebody maybe famous, and say, "Hey, man, thanks for purchasing, this product.
Mhm.
Here's how I use it. Here's some cool things you can do with it that you might have not read on the product page." And you just sit there and be like, "Oh shit." That just like raises the value of that product,
Mhm.
even though you're not spending extra money on it, kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah. That's cool. It's cool you're doing like so many different things. I feel like I
Yeah.
um yeah, I don't know. I hope to get there one day.
Yeah. Well, to me, honestly, what happened is that I've been building online for over like 10, 12 years at this point.
Yeah.
And I had this like vault of information and things that I've been through,
Mhm.
whether it's building my agency, like I said, on the back of Upwork and on the back of
Yeah.
Shopify and all these components, where I just want to almost like lower the barrier of entry for other people and
Mhm.
just let them know that it doesn't have, kind of what you said, figure it out as you fucking go. Like, don't feel like you have to have this master plan and you have to follow there's
Yeah.
so many things are going to change from the minute that you start to the minute that you feel like you're getting somewhere. Like,
Mhm.
all of those things will most likely change. And I just really want to, when I amplify a lot of things on my personal brand side, whether it's my newsletter or whatever that might be, Twitter or LinkedIn, I just want to give people a sense of like almost like that deep breath and just say, okay, like I don't have to have all this shit figured out. Like, just start building,
Yeah.
start doing. And once you start doing, you start to get open to new things.
Mhm.
And once you see those things, you start learning, you can kind of pivot the way you need to pivot. I think that's the ultimate message in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's like the biggest thing we have to like. I know we're like super over time, but like that's like the
No,
biggest
no,
thing
no.
that's like
We don't have a cap on time whatsoever.
yeah, I mean, I think that's like the biggest thing that's like unlearned as adults, right? Is like we're like super fucking high achievers. At least like I was like a try hard. I mean, I don't know. Like I think I was like a try hard like up to a certain point, but like I mean, definitely like went to one of the best universities and like like
Yeah,
did all this like education stuff and like your whole life is like planned out from you from like K to 12, right? And then college and like you have like everyone feels like they have to like go into their careers like I mean like at this point I've been working for like 8 or 9 years. It's like going into your careers and being like, hey, like you need all of this figured out. And like people, I don't know, like people go into like these professions where they like still have stuff figured out, like med school or like law school or whatever.
right.
And it's like actually that's like the hardest. Like these are like the most competitive spaces because like it's weird because like it, like it's that type of like career trajectory is like the most competitive because all the overachievers go into that category because they continue wanting to like have stuff figured out. And actually if
Yeah.
you go like into like the path of like least resistance, which is like this space of startups and business and
Hmm.
services where like most people are just still winging it, it's like you have like a
Yeah.
very like big advantage. And it's just
Yeah.
like this like ultimate irony of like even being raised by like an immigrant family, like it's always just like, hey, like you need to go into these, you need to do law school or med school or whatever. And I'm like, oh my god, like there is no way I'm able to beat anyone because I'm just like not that smart. I'm like not like I'm not like studying all day. It's just like I'm not gonna be
Right.
able to compete, honestly. Like
Yeah,
so it's
exactly. Exactly, man. No, I completely agree. And
yeah.
I think a lot more people need to be, open to that trajectory. And
Mhm.
also I think like it's not, don't quit your job and go all in on something right away. But at the same time, like test things as you have a job. Spend a
Mhm.
couple of hours every week and say, hey, I want to build, a service business. How do I, for example, build or I want to build an e-commerce brand?
Mhm.
Doesn't matter. How do I start on Shopify? How do I build a landing page on Webflow, Card,
Mhm.
or whatever these services are, and go from there and start tinkering? Oh, now I need to set up emails. How do I do that?
Mhm.
Once you start putting those things together, you start to realize, like, dude, that only took me like 15 hours, and I just learned enough to honestly go help somebody else. Like
Yeah.
maybe your mom wants to open up a shop, or your friend wants to, and you'd be
Mhm.
like, hey, I actually know how to do this. Whether you want to charge them or not charge them, that's up to you. But now you could bring that knowledge to somebody else, and maybe they get to learn something and then spread that across the way. And I think
Yeah.
people just overcomplicate the process, in my opinion. They want to have everything planned out.
Yeah.
And I always say, my saying goes, expectations are resentments just waiting to happen. Like, you know what I mean? Like when you have all these high
I'm gonna
expectations,
reuse
you're, oh,
that.
yeah, you seriously are.
Mhm.
Like, you can have the expectation, I'm gonna go make $1 million tomorrow, and if you make $999,000,
Yeah.
you're gonna be like, oh man, I didn't do it. And it's like, dude, no, you did it. Like, you fucking did it.
Yeah.
Like, call it whatever you want, but you did it. And I think a lot of people have these really, really high, like elevated, bloated
Mhm.
expectations where they feel like a failure if they don't reach that exact same thing. And I think on the other side too, if you do reach it, it doesn't feel as exciting because you
Well, I
kind
think
of
this
set
goes
those
back to what we
expected.
talked about before, which is like the social media thing, right? It's
Yeah,
like you have all of these like gurus on social media that are like saying shit like they know what's up, but they actually don't. Or they like borderline
right.
know, but they like are definitely not like sold to the extent that they, frame themselves.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
then like even as like even as like we're growing up, but like even like now it's like we look like we're taught to like look up to certain people because we're like, oh, like these adults have it figured out. And then you like become an adult and you're like, wait, actually, like no one has it fucking figured out.
Nobody has it figured out, dude.
um,
Nobody has it. You show me a person that you think got it figured out, and I'll show you the exact same person that doesn't have shit
yeah.
figured out.
Like it's like no one has it figured out, but least of all, like people who are like on social media just like talking, like, you know, like they have it
Yeah,
figured out.
exactly.
So,
Exactly.
it's like it's like
Exactly.
if you really figured it out. I mean, there's like the minority, and you know, there's a lot of great people on Twitter, but like I think like, you know, it's like if you really figured it out, you wouldn't be on Twitter. You'd be like somewhere
Right.
else. So
Right.
I
Right.
don't know. It's
Exactly. Exactly. Even Elon hasn't figured anything out, and he's like done so
he has
well for
he
it.
has at least figured out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
No, I
That's
mean,
the
there's a
crazy
lot of
part.
great people on Twitter and LinkedIn and all these networks, but like I think like generally speaking, it's just like, yeah, I think like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know, man.
Crazy. Well, go ahead and let people know, where they can find you. Maybe follow you on Twitter. Talk about Replo. Anything else that you wanna pitch here or plug, whatever you want to call it. Love having this conversation with you, man. It was awesome, and yeah, man, just give people what they want to hear.
Yeah, totally. So you can find out more about Replo at replo.app. So replo.app. And then from there, you can join our community. It's a Slack community. And then also follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is ReploHQ. And then my Twitter handle is Yuxin Zhu, as YUXINZOO. So it's a pun with my last name. But yeah, I mean, overall, like, you know, really enjoy chatting, and we should definitely like catch up more. Yeah, again, like
Yeah,
kind of going full circle, like I feel like we've been working together like through like, you know, various channels, like,
yeah.
and just never had a time to like catch up. So
No, this
yeah.
was this is a pleasure, and I just want to say thank you for sharing all the info that you shared.
Mhm.
Your way of doing things and your transparency and candidness. I really appreciate that. My goal always with this podcast is to just give people an insight into different entrepreneurs and people who are figuring out on their journey,
Mhm.
where they started, where they're going, what they're doing now, where they want to potentially be in a few years.
Yeah.
And I think you did an amazing job of explaining all that and shining light on things like YC and all these other components. So thank you for being on. I'm excited to get this episode out to the world, and good luck with everything. Most importantly, I think what you guys are building is really cool. And yeah, man, I think it's gonna do really well, and I think it's already doing pretty damn well. So I'm going to be rooting for you guys and making sure that me and Justin continue working on the content side of things and keep crushing it there.
Yeah, no, totally. Let's do it. And yeah, best of luck with to your stuff as well. Sounds like you guys are working on some pretty exciting stuff as well. So can't
Absolutely, man.
complain with
Thank you.
that.
Well, you made it to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for tuning into What is My Brain podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got some value out of it. Make sure you hit the subscribe button or the follow button to get notified when new episodes are live. I'm out. Thank you.